After a prolonged delay, a director's switch-up, and, depending on who you ask, a complete barren marketing campaign, Pixar's most recent original film, Elio, has been out and about for the past few days now, or past few weeks depending on how long this video takes to get made, and it's looking not very good. Let's not sugarcoat it, this movie is crashing hard. Despite getting mostly good critical reception for those who are actually willing to go out and see it, it seems nobody wants to watch this thing. I've personally been seeing more conversation about another original animated film that came out the same day on Netflix, from what can now be considered a rival studio, which I feel is pretty emblematic about the current reputation and reality of Pixar. Once an unstoppable creative behemoth that felt like it was unchallenged, has now turned into a, well, still a creative company, but one that can't catch a break from various controversies, executive meddling, and what I honestly feel like is more of an apparent fight for relevancy in an age and industry that is changing. Seemingly for the worse. Elio's financial disaster honestly isn't surprising to me in the slightest, as throughout the past year, the red flags were kind of obvious this movie was going to struggle, so I think it would be nice to do a little mini autopsy on the movie itself, and a little bit of its production to see why I personally think this movie's fate was sealed pretty early on. God, I miss doing this. Also, minor spoilers incoming. If you were to ask me what a trailer is meant to accomplish, I'd say the most important aspect of any trailer, regardless of medium, is to effectively sell the audience on an ideal or a premise. To give the audience a taste of what they're buying into. And while I stand by the idea of trying not to write off something's existence because the trailer was mid, I'm also a human being, so I can be a hypocrite. The first teaser for Elio was not great, and it honestly didn't instill confidence that this premise was going to work out. Outside of my own personal taste, like the stock trailer music and the, what I'm going to call trailer core jokes, the idea as far as the teaser showed of a kid being abducted out of nowhere by aliens and having to defend the Earth on trial really doesn't seem that strong of a premise. Now, it's an interesting idea on paper, but the trailer didn't really sell it that well to me. And after watching it, I really didn't have any desire to keep up with the movie. So when I did hear the news that this movie was getting delayed, it didn't surprise me. But eventually seeing the new trailer, while still not convincing me that it was a must-watch, definitely hit a lot better than the first one, and I think this is a good jumping off point to start talking about the film proper. I think reworking Elio's motivation from him just getting randomly abducted to him actively wanting to leave Earth is a much better decision character-wise, as it makes him a more proactive protagonist. For what it's worth, I think Elio as the main character generally works for the movie, and he is definitely one of the better kid characters to come out of the studio in recent memory. I love how the first time we see him, he's hiding under a table and not saying a word and completely ignoring his aunt. The character animation really sells the idea that this kid has been through it. I actually relate a little to Elio being very passionate about space. In like late elementary, early middle school, I was very much into learning about the solar system and UFO abductions. Elio is also decently multifaceted, taking it very personally when people lack interest in his habits. And like most kids his age, he does very brass things, but he's also not super naive and can clearly tell when he's in over his head. YouTube film critics can sometimes be very harsh towards kid characters in media for being annoying or making decisions that from an adult perspective seem completely illogical. It's fine to have preferences and there is room to criticize, but for me, if the actions and attitudes are in character, like, yeah, from the information we have from the story, they would do this, then I don't know what to tell you. What I'm trying to say is that pretty much all of what Elio does in the movie is within his character, which is like basic character writing 101. I know that sounds like I'm taking a jab at the movie, but they could have easily flubbed up this character, and I'm happy to see that they didn't. I also gotta give credit to his voice actor, I don't want to mispronounce his name, so here is his name, for really selling that kid energy. And looking into his filmography, I was surprised to find out he's actually a regular occurrence on Disney-related media in the past few years. So it makes perfect sense that he slots well into a sci-fi setting as well as he does. I might as well talk about the other standout character, being Elio's friend Gordon, who's honestly the best character in the film. He gives off the vibe of that one very enthusiastic friend that likes to hear themselves talk, but you don't stop them because they occasionally say something unironically hilarious and out of pocket. Yeah, that's Gordon.
Hi, Dad. I'm a bargaining chip.
Some of the best scenes in this film are him and Elio just bouncing off each other. Their chemistry is that good. But outside of Elio and Gordon, this movie really doesn't have many standout characters. Despite the marketing and McDonald's toys, the council members are just here to introduce the Communiverse to Elio and also being collateral for when Lord Grygon starts crashing out. They pretty much only exist to serve the narrative. They have names and personalities, but I honestly can't remember any of them. And I unfortunately feel the same way about Olga, who's Elio's aunt who acts as his parental guardian because his parents died of mysterious circumstances. I'll give the movie credit that it does give some time to really show how she's struggling to keep things together, and that she does really care for Elio, but the middle portion of the movie ends up sidelining her pretty hard, with her only getting really 3 or so scenes. I feel we needed one more scene with her in the second act, especially considering what happens to her in that last scene. But instead, we have her on the beach where she reconciles with Elio before the third act truly kicks off. It is a good emotional scene, but it still feels a little bit awkward with how it was set up. In terms of villains, Lord Grygon was fine. It is admittedly funny seeing him go from being a character that from the teaser was on good terms with Elio and was on the council to the revamped movie where the first time we see him he's threatening said council. I don't know, I just think that switch up is kind of funny. Again, as an antagonist, I think he's serviceable. Brad Garrett freaking kills it in the role, and honestly, it's 85% of the reason why I like his character. But outside of that, and his arc being decently handled for what it was, he was fine. He definitely slots into one of the more middle-of-the-road Pixar villains. The terms fine and middle-of-the-road are honestly pretty synonymous with this movie. Since this movie was in development hell, I did go into the movie trying to be aware of any bits that felt off so I can point at the screen and be like, yep, there's the rewrite. But outside of maybe some scenes going way too fast and certain elements that are introduced and are completely dropped, like that one invention that creates anything of your desires, does that really appear anywhere else in the film? If I remember, I don't remember. If someone does, check me in the comments. And some of the dialogue being clunky and occasionally on the nose. Outside of those observations, I felt they did an okay job hiding away any of the production issues from overly hampering the final product. In terms of Pixar's most recent stuff, it does skew pretty young. A lot of the jokes and dialogue feels very directed at kids, which I know what some of you out there are going to say. But compared to Pixar's older stuff, hell, even compared to some of their newer stuff like Turning Red or Soul, which, yes, still being family films, had elements that older adults could gravitate towards. I'm not saying Elio is an unwatchable film for anyone over the age of 11 or something like that, but if you do plan on watching this, go in knowing that it skews way younger than what you might be used to in terms of Pixar. And that point of how overall kiddie this movie feels is a point of contention for some people. Speaking of points of contention, I mostly try to ignore certain aspects of animation discourse like 80s and 90s animation is so peak, these new animators will never be as good as those old ones, even though some of those old creators are still working on these projects, or the dreaded Cal Arts discourse. I try not to always indulge in these discourses, but this time around I can actually see where people are coming from and even agree to an extent. Pixar, I feel, has always been criticized for their art styles and how safe they tend to play with them, and even their formulas for how to make movies, even if I felt it was from a very vocal minority. But with this recent B-mouthy style that kinda got its start in The Good Dinosaur, and arguably became more prevalent in movies like Luca and Turning Red, that vocal minority is starting to become a lot more prevalent. Now, I generally like the art direction of Luca and Turning Red, but by the time Win or Lose came around, and now with Elio, yeah, the style is starting to wear out its welcome. And it's come to the point where I've seen people mention that the character designs in Elio are why they have no interest in seeing it, or that it might be one of the main reasons why the movie just isn't doing well. And this is coming from a person who grew up on quote-unquote CalArts style media. I am slightly biased towards this style, so it says something when even Elio didn't really do much for me visually. This is just me, but I feel if they took the approach of the CG Brawl Star trailers, where they lean very heavily into the 2D side of things like for the mouths and the eyes, along with other Spider-Verse adjacent stuff, I feel the movie could have really stood out a lot more. I don't really care for Brawl Stars because I hate gacha shit, but damn, those trailers they put out look incredible. 2D or 3D. I'm generally in agreement with the sentiment that Pixar at this point should just jump on the Spider-Verse hyper-stylized animation train at this point. While I haven't watched it yet, Win or Lose seemed like they were already experimenting with some of that stylization. And again, I'm just speaking from what little I've seen, but it seems like an alright first step. But I feel they just need to go full throttle at this point. They just need to join the cult at this point. Oh, thank God they're finally starting. While the human designs generally do nothing for me, the aliens along with the environmental design is where I think this movie is at its best visually. I love the look of the characters like this supercomputer-esque goo blob that morphs into various shapes. This female council lady that's just a marine flatworm but in space, which gives me Finding Nemo callbacks. And the movie has these doctor robots that look like old Hasbro eye dogs from the 2000s. But I also get Drossel, the robot girl from Fireball vibes too, which, hey, that's relevant. I think that last one is a coincidence though. The alien designs and setting reminded me of another spacefaring animated project called Horizon Knots. A currently fully funded and in production indie pilot developed by Rubbergun Studios, which is headed by Andy Ortiz, or Dynamo Tune. Also, I totally have not backed the project and not waiting anxiously until it comes out. Both projects have a protagonist of Latino origin dealing with all sorts of space shenanigans. One of the main crew members, Krug, sort of looks like Lord Grygon, and the general aesthetic mixes space with undersea iconography. I bring this up not only to chill, but because it makes me wonder if in an alternative timeline during the retooling, they made this movie into like a PG Guardians of the Galaxy space adventure. Just an idea. If you couldn't tell, most of my tone throughout this video has been pretty mellow, and that's because while I can't say Elio is a good movie, it's also one that when I came out the theater I was like, yeah, that wasn't for me. Again, this was a movie I originally had no interest in seeing, but then I saw the projections that the movie was going to bomb hard, so I decided, out of curiosity and honestly a little bit of sympathy for Pixar, I decided to give it a shot. And what I got out of it was a very average level Pixar film. That has its moments, but it plays itself way too safe even for my taste. And on that front, I really don't blame people for not being interested in this. Especially compared to the other highly anticipated films that surround it. Films that have a lot more investment into whether or not they'll be good and how that'll affect their respective cinematic universes going forward. Also, both of them being IPs that have not had very good adaptations in recent memory. So compare that to a fun but overall safe animated kids film that's going to end up on Disney Plus in a few weeks anyway. It's no wonder why this movie is being skipped over despite it also having a lot riding on it. But like I said in the beginning, this doesn't surprise me. Back in May of last year, Bloomberg released an article about the current state of Pixar at the time. The article was pretty infamous when it dropped for not only highlighting the black-pilled state of the company at the time, but also producing such enlightening insights like advising future directors to focus less on personal stories and instead to develop stuff with mass appeal first. Now, this is just speculation on my part, but when this movie was delayed for the reasoning being the 2023 writer's strike, I genuinely believe that, but this being Hollywood and business, there's a cynical part of me that wants to believe the other underlying reason was to make the movie more mainstream. Apparently, when the original director was sifted off to Coco 2, why does that exist? Enough of his ideas were still kept that he still received credit in the final film. But it makes me wonder if it was just the general skeleton of the original script that was kept, but the more personal stuff taken out in the final draft. Again, just speculation. Which is what I would say until this article from the Hollywood Reporter came out and basically confirmed all of my suspicions. The movie was originally going to have a lot more personal themes like Elio being gay, but it was delayed and many of those aspects were taken out. Cause personal stories. Sand off all the edges and then make the most crowd-pleasing slot possible. And what did you get out of it? But to be honest, even if the original vision was kept, there's still a chance this movie still wouldn't have done well. I know this is far from being fair, but comparing the trailer for this and Sony's K-pop Demon Hunters, another original animated film that premiered the same day as Elio, yeah, it's easy to see which one looks riskier and, dare I say, more unique. Which, since I brought it up a handful of times, I might as well just say my quick thoughts about the movie as a whole. Spoilers for K-pop Demon Hunters, if you don't want to hear them, skip to this timecode right here. I'll say off the bat that while this film is way more up my alley than Elio and therefore I enjoyed it a lot more, that doesn't mean the movie isn't without its own little issues. One of the main messages of the movie is that you shouldn't bury away your problems and it's best to seek out others who will understand your faults and help you. Well, I think this is a great message, especially in today's day and age and in relation to the movie's main subject being, K-pop. It does frustrate me a little that the movie almost sticks the landing but misses the bullseye by just a hair. Despite the Huntrix being a trio, the story gives so much attention to Rumi's conflict that it leads to the other girls feeling a little hung dry. Which sucks because all three of them have great personalities and chemistry. We get to see all of Rumi's baggage, but Mira and Zoe? We get quick mentions of their problems, but they don't really get expanded upon in a capacity that I personally find satisfying. We don't really get to see how each of the girls' flaws causes a rift in the band, as the movie is so tied to Rumi's perspective, outside of, the main villain and the love interest. Also, on my first viewing, I forgot the stand-in mother/mentor figure was even in this movie. She has a grand total of like 4 minutes of screen time, despite her being decently pivotal in the third act, especially in relation to Rumi's arc. I honestly felt that she should have been in the movie a lot more. Not by like a lot, but just one scene of her talking to Rumi before shit hit the fan. I'm guessing that's one thing these movies have in common. I say all this because the third act is like really damn good. It's where everything starts to click and it genuinely got me pumped, but damn, it almost gets it. I think the first and third acts are where the movie is at strongest, but the second is where I thought the movie was personally starting to lose me a bit. The second act throws out a few interesting ideas I would have liked to see get expanded upon, but they really don't, at least to my taste. But one thing I can't give the movie credit for is how infectious its energy is. This movie's got vibes for days. Despite my minor gripes with the execution of the story, I was locked in for the entire ride. Also, this being a Sony film, it looks and sounds amazing, despite clearly not having as big as a budget as the Spider-Verse films. That being said, in terms of original movies that come out between the Spider-Verse movies, trademark, I'd honestly still prefer Mitchell's vs. the Machines. Not only because I think it has a much tighter narrative, I also relate to it a lot more. The whole parents second-guessing your artistic endeavors but then come around to accepting them message just personally hit a lot harder. Not saying relatability is the end-all be-all for a movie being good, it's just something I felt I should acknowledge. I'm glad this movie is seemingly doing well if the Netflix ratings are to be believed, but it is a missed opportunity this wasn't put in theaters. But Demon Hunter's success, not that one, touches on a point I mentioned earlier in the video. We are in an era where a Sony film is not only arguably doing much better than a Pixar film, it's also just generally being discussed a lot more. My personal feed has been filled with so much Demon Hunter glazing, fan art, thirst traps, so much more, and I think that is a testament to how things have changed. Back in the 2000s and even the early to mid 2010s, if you were to rank the best animation studios putting out movies in America, Disney and Pixar would be at the top. Despite Disney being, an evil corporation, yada yada, their output at the time, even outside of animation in particular, was pretty consistent. Yeah, Disney has never been a stranger to producing garbage, but it felt like the good generally outweighed the bad. And they established a trust with the audience thanks to these quality releases. But nowadays, it's a completely different story. Disney over the past half-decade or so has had its reputation flipped on its head, with a growing chorus of people agreeing that the company's output has been pretty subpar and below standard, even considering previous decades, along with very questionable business decisions. The magic is gone and we can clearly see the man behind the curtain. But in the wake of all this, other studios have been starting to gain notoriety. For the longest time, Sony was considered a C-tier studio that, while occasionally putting out good stuff, would then turn around and make not good stuff. Then came Into the Spider-Verse, which, despite it only being one movie, was not only critically lauded, not only changed the animation landscape for years to come, but it also absolved Sony of all their past filmmaking sins. In animation, at least. Their live-action stuff just needs an exorcism at this point. And since then, with maybe one exception, most of the stuff they put out has generally been well received, if not critically praised. And most of their future output not only seems to be completely original, but also being more broad in the subject matters they're tackling. While saying they're the next Pixar might be a bit of a stretch, they are indeed a rival to the mouse at this point, and they should not be underestimated. And then look at DreamWorks. Thanks to one amazing sequel that nobody expected to be as good as it was, it basically convinced an entire online population into thinking DreamWorks was on some divine rise the likes never seen before, completely ignoring their past history, only for Ruby Gillman and Kung Fu Panda 4 to come out and dash their hopes immediately. But that aside, DreamWorks has gotten a lot more charitability over the past few years, and people are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt more than ever before. You know how the Best Animated Feature Award at the Oscars was nicknamed the Disney Pixar Award for the longest time? Because for most of the category's existence, they've won. There was a time from 2012 to 2017 where Pixar and Disney dominated. I'm not saying all of these wins weren't undeserved, but Frozen and Big Hero 6, really? But in 2018, Spider-Verse came and broke the streak, being the first non-Disney Pixar film to win in 6 years. And then they came back and won 3 more times. But since 2022, Pixar and Disney have not won the award. Last year, they lost to Flow, a movie made by an incredibly small team using free software you can download and use right now. Which part of me thinks that was karma for how Pixar laid off a bunch of animators that year. I mean, did they not see what happened with Across the Spider-Verse? The underlying theme here is that the playing field has changed. Pixar and Disney are not the only big shots in town anymore, and I generally think that's a good thing. While again, I still liked Elio for the most part, it was still a very safe movie. And you know what? I'm conflicted because the movie isn't really doing anything fundamentally wrong. But when I look at the development history and what we now know, I just can't help but feel apathetic. When I see Disney, the multi-million-dollar company that has all the resources at its fingertips, micromanaging and meddling in their own projects, interfering with the vision because they're so afraid of the movie not hitting their standards, what can I say besides this honestly feels a little bit deserved. This overly protective, micromanaging aspect of Disney just needs to stop. Yes, I know executives will always have their influences on the final product, and you know, it comes with the territory. But when it comes to a level of actively hampering films, telling creators they can't talk about certain subject matters because mass appeal, well, you're gonna end up with more Elios and Star Wars sequel trilogies, instead of more K-pop demon hunters and sinners.